And we thank the county for hosting this event this afternoon. And now I'd like to present once again your county leader, Westchester County Executive George Latimer.
This is a very sobering day, and it is a time to consider sobering thoughts. Death comes to all living beings. Death comes to all living beings, all of us, all people everywhere. Death comes in its own time and its own place, with its own circumstances. Death can come without warning, and it can certainly come before we have had enough time to prepare ourselves for eternity. Death, sadly, is unifying. It is the great equalizer. When those towers fell, when the outer wall of the Pentagon was breached, when the planes that were hijacked fell to earth in Shanksville and elsewhere, death came. Death came to Christians and Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, people of any religious belief, and those who have no particular religious belief. Death came to those who were white, European, stock, those who were African American, black. It came to those who were Hispanic, those who were Asian, those who hail from all different ethnicities. Death came to old and young and middle ages. Death came to financial executives with MBAs working in major corporations, and death came to the secretaries who worked in the same office. Death also came to the maintenance man, the waitress in those locations. Death came to brave professional firefighters who went up the tower when others were trying to come down the towers. Death came to the EMS and police officers who responded. Death came to the airline pilots who had their cockpits overrun and saw the vehicles that they knew how to operate operated as a weapon of death. And now, the death that occurred that day is not finished with us, because we have men and women who responded after that day to try to put the society back together again, now suffering death prematurely. I knew Sean O'Neill, who died that day. I knew Tommy Palazzo, who died that day. I remember seeing them in Kelly's Sea Level in Rye, just casually, with a sports game on TV, and we had beers and just talked. I remember Doug Karpoloff. I remember from the 9/11, those who've died from related illnesses. I remember Brian Payne, how I would see him at Mamaroneck Town Fire Department events or the block parties on the corner of Fern and Valley Road. These men were alive to me, and they're dead now. But death comes to all living beings, and in its day will come for me as it will for you. So what do we take from the individual suffering of these families and of these individuals from a personal level that makes it a societal response? It's to understand that we have shared humanity. This nation, in the 22 years since this day, has become more divided than any time in our lifetime. We have difficulty talking to people who we might disagree with. We unfriend them. You go to a family gathering and you cannot talk to Cousin Joe or Uncle Lou, or they can't talk to each other because we found so much of disagreement between each other that we vilify each other and we hate each other. And we link into the natural differences that we have demographically, those differences of religion and of gender identification and of racial heritage, and we add more division to the society. And yet, what 9/11 taught us, more than the rise of Islamic terrorism, is the common humanity and fate that affected everybody in those towers, regardless of those differences. We don't know who died, that was tall or short, fat or skinny. We don't know who was conservative or liberal or any gradation in between. They suffered their death on that day, all of them, at the same time, roughly speaking. And in that greater sense, I've shared this thought before, in that greater sense, those of us who live, we are all on the 107th floor. We are all on Flight 93 too, sitting alongside those same people. We don't have an immediate threat of death that we know of, as they did, but we know that our lives have limits to them, and those limits will come due. So why? Why do we find those differences and work them over day after day after day? Why do we go on social media to argue with our fellow Americans and our fellow humans over points that we disagree on? Why do we do that? When we're all on Flight 93 together. We're all there together. Death has brought us together. So let us learn the fate that they learned on the 107th floor and on Flight 93. Our lives are intertwined. Our fates are intertwined. Let us remind ourselves as Americans and as humans, we have more in common, and we need to work at those things that bring us together and try to give us a better life together while we have that time together. They had no time. We still have time.